Hey everybody, this is Joe for Pioneer Nexus MTG coming at you with another deck overview, this time Bant Humans. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below. So Bant Humans is a version of a deck that we've looked at, which is both Mono White Humans and Azorius Humans, basically featuring Collected Company and some other card choices. The primary addition, obviously Collected Company. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You can choose 2 creature cards with 3 mana or less value each, put them into play. This is obviously very good in the attrition-based matchups, good at finding key pieces. Although it is a variance card, can sometimes hit like 5 lands and another Collected Company and you don't get anything out of it. But that's why you try to build your deck with as many creatures as possible. In addition to that, you get to play Werewolf Pack Leader, which is a 3/3 human werewolf. Whenever it attacks with a combined total of 6 power or more, you may draw a card. And then for 3 and a red, or 3 and a green, it becomes a 5/3 with trample and is no longer a human. Experiment 1 also gets added to the mix of 1-drops that you have access to, in addition to Dauntless Bodyguard, protect key creatures and being a 2/1 Savannah line, and Kithion as a way to have a 1-mana planeswalker potentially in a deck that's trying to go wide. Charming Prince as a way to gain some life, exile good cards that you might have, flickering your things like Thalia's Lieutenant or Reflector Mage for the powerful effects they have, and also, filtering your draws, gaining a little bit of life. Thalia, obviously this is primarily here to disrupt your opponent. Very good at making things awkward for things like Rakdos, things like Blue-White Control, etc. Also very good against decks like Lotus Field combo that otherwise you don't have a ton of interaction for. Atomic, this one is a one-of that we've seen pop up every now and again. Primarily keeps Lotus Field combo from being able to copy itself with Thespian Stage. Might have some other corner case utilities, but that is the primary one. Reflector Mage is kind of a tempo-esque card, very much in the place you'd see something like Brutal Cathar, bounces a creature back to your opponent's hand. They can't replay it for a turn, and doesn't have the downside of whenever it dies, the creature comes back into play automatically. It does buy you a little bit of time in some matchups and allows you to tempo your opponent out. Adeline, great way to kill your opponent quickly. It's a big X4 that whenever a creature you control attacks, you get a 1/1 human token. Can kind of be an army in a can. Then Extraction Specialist can put a creature value 2 or less from the graveyard back on the battlefield. Great way to recur your things like Dauntless Bodyguard or Thalia's Lieutenant. And then if they happen to kill it, you also get access to that creature back. Absent Falconer, each creature you control +1/+1 has flying on it. Basically turns your entire army into a bunch of unblockables. The downside is you no longer get to play things like Mutavault and such, as you have the very demanding 3-color mana base. But, you get the power of Collected Company to kind of make up for that. Sideboard, you really play a lot of the same greatest hits that you've seen in the Mono White lists, except you get to play things like Shaper's Sanctuary to make spot removal a good bit worse against you. Portable Hole, pretty decent removal spell against the other aggressive decks. Declaration in Stone when you need a more hard removal spell, especially for things like Kalitas, Sheoldred, Cavalier of Thorns, Old Growth Troll, etc. Cathar Commando is a 3/1 with Flash that can destroy an artifact or enchantment by sacrificing it. Lavinia, primarily here for Lotus Field combo, for being completely honest. Thalia Heretic Cathar makes it awkward for your opponent's creatures and non-basic lands to come into control, which in this format is a lot of those. And Elite Spellbinder as an additional way to disrupt what your opponent's doing by making their cards cost 2 more whenever it comes into play. And it's a 3/1 flyer to boot for 3 mana that happens to fit with your humans theme. For example, of the list, a lot of the same cards. They're used to the aforementioned Brutal Cathar, which is another removal-esque spell thing you might see played in these lists. Obviously, the plus side is this is a hard removal spell as opposed to bouncing it back to their hand. Downside is if it dies, the creature comes back. Now, obviously, it can flip back and forth and exile a bunch of creatures over a course of turns, but the odds of your opponent not being able to kill a 2/2 for 3 mana, a little bit shaky. Now, obviously, there are a lot of other things your opponent's going to want to kill, but, there are some downsides to running this, especially when you have access to something like Reflector Mage. Hopeful Initiate, this is a 1/2 with Turning. Whenever it attacks, obviously, if you have a creature with more power than it that's attacking with it, it gets to level up. And then you get to play 2 and white to remove 2 +1/+1 counters from among any creatures you control to destroy target artifact or enchantment. Can be important in a lot of things against like Fire's Invention and such. Leyline Binding, etc. Obviously, this land mana base is a little bit more on the creature, the Secluded Courtyard, and Unclaimed Territory. No Cavern of Souls to make them uncounterable in this format, but still decent mana for a 3-mana deck. though a little bit awkward for casting your collected companies. Beyond that, unlicensed tourist for any type of graveyard nonsense, along with things like Rest in Peace that you can run, Extraction Specialist, we've already kind of talked, Lorn of the Third Path, whenever it enters the battlefield, destroy up to one target artifact or enchantment. You and each opponent may draw a card. A little bit awkward, but primarily here for the destruction in effect when it comes into play. Redain, nice way to tax your opponent from casting their sweepers or expensive planeswalkers and such, or on the flip side, can make damage a little bit worse against something like Mono Red. Aether Channeler is an interesting one. It's a 2/1 for 2 and a blue that can, when it comes into play, you may bounce another non-land permanent to its owner's hand, draw a card, or put a 1/1 bird token into play. Quite a nice utility for any type of grounding matchups. Pair it with things like Extraction Specialist to get a little bit ahead against decks like Rakdos, and can give you a little bit of tempo in some other matchups where maybe something like Reflector Mage has no targets if they're not playing any creatures of note. Finally, this version playing one unique card in the main deck, and that is Anointed Peacekeeper. Whenever it enters the battlefield, look at the target player's hand, or opponent's hand, choose any card name. Spells your opponent's cast with the chosen name cost 2 more to cast. Activated abilities of that also cost 2 more. This can be great in addition to taxing with your other effects. And then sideboard, we're already seeing a lot of the cards that are kind of going to pop up here. Obviously, Wedding Announcement. This is something you would see in a lot of the mono-white sideboards. This either gives you a 1/1 white body each turn for 3 turns, or draws cards if you happen to attack with 3 or more creatures, or 2 or more creatures. And then on the backside, it's an Anthem for your creatures, but this is primarily here for the attrition-based matchups. And then a card that I haven't seen in a long time, I think the last time I saw this was when Bant Humans was a thing in Standard, is when it's a 3/3 lifelinker for Flash, with Flash. When Heron Grace Champion enters the battlefield, other human creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain lifelink until end of turn. This is a lot like the Catilda out of the Spirits decks. This kind of really blows apart any type of combat math, any type of racing your opponent might be doing. This is primarily against other, humans decks, Merfolk, Elves, all these other decks. They're just trying to race you, maybe even Mono Red. Just kind of really gets around that point of making the racing really bad for your opponent. And obviously not a great collected company hit, but as a one-of can be a lot of fun. Now, where does Bant excel? Bant excels by being a little bit better in the kind of grindy attrition-based matchups. Collected Company is just a powerful card in those situations. Having access to Werewolf Pack Leader gives you a little bit more card draw. Experiment 1 is an excellent 1-drop that pairs with your already good 1-drops that you play. Downside is your mana's a lot worse. You're not playing fetch lands and shock lands in this format. You don't have access to Cavern of Souls, so you only have the 8 kind of creature-based lands, and then you have to play a bunch of green sources to make your collected companies good. So you're either taking unnecessary damage from your lands, or you're playing things like Mana Confluence, or you're playing these pathways. And the mana can be a little bit awkward and trip you up sometimes. So while the deck is very powerful, but you can sometimes have to go from white 1-drop on 1 to double green on 2 to double white on 3. Deck gets a little bit hectic in what it's trying to do and can just have a lot of problems with mana. That said, this is much better into the kind of attrition-based matchups. It's a little bit better against things like Rakdos and such. Now, obviously, you lose access to a card like Brave the Elements as a one-hit KO against decks like Mono Green and such. But you do gain the utility of having the green cards and collected company. So overall, you do get an increase in power with a little bit of inconsistency in the mana base. So a little bit better in the attrition-based matchups, a little bit worse against matchups where something like Brave the Elements is a breaker against like Mono Green and such. That said, you do put a lot of pressure on them. You do have things like Reflector Mage, so you can kind of still pressure them and stuff a lot. But, this is more of a, do you want to have more of a grinding game against the attrition-based decks? Obviously, Mono White does have Brave the Elements, Wedding Announcement, and Extraction Specialist, but sometimes this just aren't enough. And sometimes you just need a little bit more kick. So you have a lot of Rakdos, a lot of Isn't in your format. Collected Company might be the way to go. If you don't, maybe Mono White's the way to go. So, as always, if you like these informative deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up. Don't forget to join us for our next deck overview here in a couple of days.